Yeah, it's like a margarita place that's like really like giant margaritas
All right.
for $5.
So,
like, even nuts.
Good
Yeah.
morning. I hope
That's what it's
everybody
called. Wine
had a
down.
good weekend.
Yeah.
The fair starts this week, which is very exciting to me. So I'm going to go after class and get my season ticket to the fair because I just cannot wait to walk around and look at all of the marketing opportunities and see all of the things that people would rather have than their own money. It's just incredible. So I encourage you all to go to the fair.
But we wanted Tulsa.
During 10 days that it is running from the 14th to the 24th, because it really is a fascinating marketing study. So I kept feeling like I was missing something, that I had forgotten something in this class the last week. And I know you're going to find this incredibly hard to believe, but it turns out I did forget an entire chapter on environmental scanning. We didn't talk about environmental scanning in here, did we? And if you look at the syllabus, it says that the first exam is on Thursday, right? So I don't have enough time to finish talking about marketing ethics, do marketing research, and have an exam on Thursday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the chapter on environmental scanning on the second exam, since I don't know, I was so enthused about getting to marketing ethics that I absolutely forgot to cover the chapter on environmental scanning. So I will put that on the second exam, so you'll have one fewer chapter for this first exam to study for. Having said that, I had to then go back through, I've started creating the first exam. I create new exams every semester so that students, that I know that they're out there, because I give them to you. I post them on D2L. In fact, I sent out an email and a post that said, here's the exam. So I had to recreate the exam. So I'm also giving you these questions as supplemental example questions. Since I will have to take out the questions that I had in there on environmental scanning, I'm giving you these as examples, the vignettes of the type of questions that you'll have for the marketing ethics portion of the first exam. So I'm giving these to you. So read the vignette, because these will be similar to the questions that I'll ask for marketing ethics. And then also the first three questions, 28, 29, and 30, will be similar to those questions that you will see on the second exam with regard to making logical arguments, because we have a lecture in there on making logical arguments. It's not part of the book, but they're fundamentally important to A, you're doing well on the individual article review assignment and the group project, and then also doing well in marketing in terms of understanding how to present your ideas. So those questions will be similar to the ones that you'll have for the second exam on logic and critical thinking. Yes, sir.
Our syllabus set exam was on the 18th. Monday or Tuesday. Or whatever. But you said that.
I still don't think I can get to environmental scanning. So
We're having the test on Tuesday, right?
that's next Tuesday. So it's a week from today. All right, because I was going to have a hard time getting through the lecture today in terms of watching the videos that I want to watch and also getting to market research. So, why is that? Probably there are extras coming around back. Are there any extras on this one? I think there will be. I thought I counted enough for this row. I know I'm
to LA like in October. My friends go every year.
Yes, sir.
deal actually.
What? The practice exam, there are 2 practice exams. Let me make sure there are enough copies. There are 2 practice exams listed.
Well, their sisters are probably time too.
Did everybody on this row already? You got one over there? Yeah. So let me show you that on D2L. The second screen will come on in just a second so that you guys can see this as well. So there are, if you go to the content tab in module 1, there are 2 practice exams in addition to these questions that I just handed out today. If you scroll down to fall exam 1 from principals, this was from a year ago. This is the practice exam 1 that I put up there. And then also, if you go back to module 1, the newest one that I put up was from spring of 2017. So there are 2 sets of practice exams on there for you to look at, in addition to these sets of questions that I just gave you today. Everybody got that? And I think I sent out also on the course home. Also, if you look at the spring 2017 under the news items, there's a copy of exam 1 from the spring semester as well. There's not one. I lost it. I lost that exam. I have no idea where that exam is. So, I would suggest that as you go through those, since the answer key is there, at least for the spring one, that you actually try and work through those first before you, I know what I would do if I were in your position. I would work through them so that I knew what the answers were, and I'll talk more about this, about how to approach the exams in this class, so that I would understand what the thinking was before I checked the answers, rather than going through and circling the correct answers and trying to back into why that's the correct answer. Because I switch the exams every single semester. I make new exams, so it's sort of predicated on what I talk about for that semester. Any other questions regarding that? Okay. So we were talking about last time, and I think we got to psychological egoism as the one of the challenges to ethics that doesn't seem right. We talked about the other 2, right? We talked about subjectivism and cultural relativism, but we didn't get finish with psychological egoism according to my notes and what I saw. Is that correct? Is that what you all have? Okay. So this is the one that doesn't seem right, because it seems like we have examples of free will, but actually if you start to think about it, is the most difficult to dispense with. And one of the reasons that this is particularly important as we think about marketing is because if it's true, when we talk about marketing research, there's at least one guy who argues that we can really predict with very accurate scientific analysis what people are going to, what they're going to buy, whether or not they're going to like something. And the guy's name is Martin Lindstrom, and I think I've mentioned him before. And he writes a book called Biology, and it's Buyology, the science of why we buy what we buy. And he basically takes this position, this psychological egoistic position, in that book. So a psychological egoist, I think I started on this last time, will say that there is no such thing as free will. We always behave selfishly. We will always look out for our own self-interests over the interests of other individuals. People are inherently selfish, and they always behave this way. And Lindstrom in biology says this is in fact true. We think we have free will, but we really don't. And one of the things that he points to is some of the things that you all talked about in your critical thinking challenge. By the way, there were a couple of winners. There were 4 winners to the critical thinking challenge, and I posted a news item. Congratulations to those winners that did exceptional jobs on their critical thinking challenge. You got bonus points for that. So some of you pointed this out in those critical thinking challenges, talking about smoking and the ethics of promoting products that are not only unnecessary but actually harmful to you. How many of you have seen the PSAs on smoking? What's a PSA? Public service announcement commercials on smoking. Let's watch one of those from YouTube.
Dogs like, you changed it. Too much for me.
I'm married, and I used to be as normal. I want to give you some lessons about getting ready in the morning. On your name. Then your hand will divide. And now you're ready for the night.
What do y'all think of that ad? Anybody want to light up?
And I had my surgery
Is it effective?
in January.
Is it effective? You think so?
No, not really.
Why not?
Because people still smoke.
Because people still smoke?
I mean, a lot of people.
A lot of people still smoke. Smoking is decreasing among every demographic except one. Which demographic is that? No, it's decreasing among old people. Huh? It's decreasing among every demographic except yours. Or yeah, decreasing among every demographic except yours. Why is that? We've seen an increase in smokers among the millennial generation. You all. What?
I just said the teenage angst. Like,
The teenage angst. It's so hard.
trying to.
You all are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. It was tragic to have to get up, toe-tappingly tragic to have to get up this morning and come to class. So you have to, you're jonesing for a cigarette. What's that?
Increase in craft beer.
It's the increase in craft beer. Well, there is a large correlation between drinking and smoking. They seem to go together. When New York State did away with smoking in bars, I thought, well, because people who don't smoke when they go to a bar. And I thought, well, there goes the bar traffic. Because I know people who don't smoke until they go to a bar and get pretty blitzed, and then all of a sudden you look over and they're smoking. They do seem to go together. It turns out that bar traffic in New York City was the first one, and they did this finally in the whole state of New York, and now lots of states have done away with smoking in every places, even in bars and things like that. It turns out that people actually increased going to bars, because there were so many people that just would not go to a bar because there was smoke there, that they would stay away from the bar. And so bar traffic actually increased in New York after they eliminated smoking in bars. And other states have followed suit as well. And lots of states. Now Oklahoma is one of the ones where you can still what? You can still smoke at a bar. How many of you have how many of you have been to Henry Hudson's lately? like you open the door and there's these clouds of smoke rolling out. The reason I point all of this out is that part of biology and part of this study that Lindstrom does is he looks at smokers and they show them these ads, these public service announcements, and if you ask them, does it make you want to stop smoking, they say yes on questionnaires. Now again, this goes back to one of the three things that we talked about with regard to philosophy. What is it we can know, and how can we know it? Well, forever and ever and ever in marketing, one of the things that we thought we knew was we could figure out what people wanted by asking them questions. And when we talk about marketing research, we'll talk about this in just a few minutes, about how limiting that may be. So what Lindstrom does is rather than asking, well, they do ask them questions. Does this make you want to quit smoking? And overwhelmingly, people say yes. They look at these. I mean, these are horrible ads. How many of you have seen the guy that's in the wheelchair that has legs and he's green and he's bald and he says, you know, cigarette ads make you think that you'll be cool. They'll tell you that the beautiful people smoke. But would you smoke if you knew you would end up, and he's in a hospital? How many of you have seen this ad in a wheelchair? And he's got part of his legs cut off. That's one of the things that does happen as a result of smoking. It increases a lot of the other health risks that you face. And so one of the things that happens is that if you're, for example, diabetic, it's even harder on your body, and it can increase the progression of that disease. And a big portion of that disease is you actually start to lose, as a result of lack of circulation in your extremities, you start to lose limbs, and they have to start cutting it off. So he looks at these ads and he's asked these people, well, does this make you, and everyone says yes. But when they looked at their brainwave activity under fMRI machines as they're watching the ads, what they noticed was the part of the brain that was triggering during the watching of these ads was not the part of the brain that experiences fear. It was the part of the brain that experiences what? Pleasure. So as they're watching the ads, they're experiencing, and they're what? Jonesing for a cigarette. And then they watched what they did after they got out of the FMR, and all of them ran out and instantly had a cigarette. So this seems like pretty powerful evidence that says we really don't have a lot of control over what we think we are doing. Maybe free will is illusory. Psychological egoists would say it is. You can't will yourself to want what you want. Can you? Can you will yourself to not want something? You may deny yourself something that you want, but for a psychological egoist, they would say, that's only because you want something else more. So you don't eat the cookie because you want what more than the cookie? What? What do you want more than the cookie? I don't really like sweets, so it doesn't really, that doesn't work for me. But most people most of my students tell me they like chocolate. Anybody like chocolate chip cookies? Almost everybody likes chocolate chip cookies. But you don't eat a lot of chocolate chip cookies, why not? And you'd say this is a product of free will. Well, you want something else. You want what? To be healthy. More than you want the chocolate chip cookie. But you didn't will yourself to want that either. Right? You didn't will yourself to want that either. Now, the question becomes, is this nature or nurture that affects it? And this is a big debate that's still raging. One of the things that we've seen marketing in recent history is all of these things for your genetic DNA. Figure out where you came from. My 23 and me. Ancestry.com. All of these ones that you can spit in a tube and figure out where you came from. And part of those that they tell you as a result of this, that their marketing is what? You're more likely, how many of you have heard the commercials, I'm more likely to drink lots of caffeine? How many of you have heard that commercial? That's one of them. She just got her 23andMe ancestry report. She slurped down coffee. She drinks a lot of coffee. turns out people of her genetic type are more likely to want caffeine. This seems to be supporting the nature that maybe it's genetic. I have a tendency to think that genetics works like this. It's important, but it's not the only factor that influences. You can take a child that has a genetic predisposition to be tall, and if they are malnourished throughout their childhood, they may not be as tall as they would be otherwise. But you're never going to take a kid that has short genes and make him tall by feeding him a lot of food. It's not going to happen. I always wanted to be 6'3". I thought that would be the perfect height. I have short parents. I'm lucky I made it to 5'11", because both of my parents are really, really short. So I got lucky that I made it as tall as I was. And when I get into airplanes now, I'm kind of grateful that I'm not 6'3", because it's more uncomfortable as they put the seats closer and closer together. So psychological egoists offer us a way, Hobbes in a book called Leviathan, offers us a way of dealing with this selfish nature that we have. And he says we come together and we form social contracts in which we agree to give up part of our autonomy and channel our selfish nature into a betterment of the whole. Hobbes imagines a point at which before we had marketing, before we had societies. And in this state of nature, now I used to think as a younger person, as a kid, that this would be pretty cool, no government. We didn't need government. I didn't need government to tell me what I needed to do. I knew who the evildoers were, and I should be allowed to take them out. How many of you had those feelings of rage and anger as younger people? Psychologists tell us that that's very common among particularly little boys. Right? So I thought this would be great. What is this state of nature like? It's a war of all against all, according to Hobbes. And it's great if you're the biggest person. This is like the Discovery Channel and Animal Planet and all of those specials on lions that you watched. How many of you like the Animal Planet and the specials on different types of animals? Love those. How many of you like that? Have you seen the ones on the lions? Lions are unique among the feline species in that they're what? What makes lions different than other felines?
They're in groups.
What?
They're
All of them are territorial to a certain extent.
in groups.
They live in prides. They're the one that actually is a social feline. Most felines are pretty solitary creatures. Lions are the exception to that. Now, it's really good to be the male lion in a pride because the lionesses do all of the work. And then the male gets to eat what he wants. But what happens when that male lion eventually gets old? The women don't eat him, no. No, that doesn't happen. He'll be challenged by another male lion. And he'll lose his pride. And that new male lion, when he takes over, will come in and do what? He'll kill all of the cubs from the previous male. This is the state of nature Hobbes imagines. And Hobbes says, well, we come together and we agree to give up some of this freedom that we have in this war of all against all in exchange for the benefits that we are able to reap from it. We are able to form societies because we can build trust that way. Now, what's the problem with psychological egoism? The problem with subjectivism, as I told you, is it seems intuitively appealing, but we can't form any society if we said everybody can do what they want. The problem with cultural relativism is similar to that, in that if we said that we had to accept cultural relativism as absolutely a priori true and legitimate, we couldn't say that certain societies throughout history are wrong and that they've committed grave moral wrongs, like Nazi Germany. The problem with psychological egoism is that it does two things. It relies on a fallacy, and we'll talk about this when we talk about argumentation and logic and critical thinking. It relies on a fallacy of equivocation. It equivocates on the term of motivation. In that, what motivates somebody is not necessarily the same thing as the feelings that flow from the act of doing it. The actus reus of the act. Because I feel good when I help somebody doesn't mean that that's the motivation. You're collapsing two terms into one. What else is wrong with psychological egoism that makes it an invalid theory? Well, can we universalize it? If we let every individual just say, well, I can't help it, it's in my nature. Can we form a society? Hobbes says we could out of the social contract, but it becomes very difficult. A third is that it's not based on rational analysis. So what makes a theory invalid is that it's emotive, it's not based on reason, and it's not universally applicable. Because we can't develop rules out of these things that help guide us. So what are the valid theories? Well, the first valid theory, these are the problems associated with these three. Emotive, not rational, allows for exceptionalism, which means allows me or my group to say, I'm special, I'm unique. So valid theories are going to have to be based on reason, they're going to be non-emotive, and they're not going to allow for exceptions to the rules that we develop based on them. What is the first valid theory that emerges that we know of? That's a complete system of philosophy that deals with these three questions, the question of knowledge, conduct, and governance. And of course, they're intimately related. The oldest, fully worked out theory that we know of, there may have been one before this, but it's lost to history if there were. We see remnants of pre-philosophy before this in certain cultures and in certain societies. For example, in India, the Upanishads are pre-philosophy and the emergence of philosophy, and we see in some of the writings pre-Plato, the emergence of philosophy, but we don't have a fully worked out one until we get to Plato. There may have been one before that. We don't know if there is. It's been lost to history. Maybe we'll uncover it at some time, but the first one that we really know about is Plato's Republic, which is the first fully worked out, and it answers all of these questions of knowledge, conduct, and governance. So that's the first fully worked out system of philosophy that deals with this. What you can get, and this is important for business students, because what you get out of Republic, or what you can tease out of it, are the philosophical foundations for communism. Now, why is this important to a business class and a business? Why is this important? Well, generally speaking, what do we focus on in business schools? What? Making money, which is antithetical to what? Which is antithetical to communism, right? We focus on making money, and we focus on utilitarian analysis. So Plato's Republic is the oldest. You can get out of it the philosophical foundations for the basis of communism. And you see that in the idea of the republic that he forms, in which everybody contributes to the republic and the ideal republic according to what they are able to do. And so he classifies men in terms of men of gold, men of silver, and men of bronze. And you then determine your jobs or your categories of jobs based on whether or not you fall into one of those three categories. If you want to read, so I have a reading list. From time to time, students have asked me what they should read to become truly educated. In more recent history, I've had fewer and fewer students that have asked me this question, because it seems most of them are more interested in sort of the utilitarian ends of a college education. But in the past, I had a lot of students that would say, what is it that I should read to be truly educated? And I have a reading list that I suggest, and on that reading list is Republic. If you want to read a great work of philosophy that's relatively easy to read, Republic is it, because it's written in the form of a dialogue, so it's got characters, it's kind of like a play. Socrates is, of course, the main character. So we know about Socrates from his most famous student, which is Plato, and also from a historian and a poet named Xenophon. Socrates himself never wrote anything down. He just wandered around Athens and asked really difficult questions, like, what is justice? So the oldest of these is Republic, Plato. Then we have teleological theories. deontological theories, and finally virtue theories that are valid ethical theories. Now again, the things that makes these valid is that they don't allow for exceptions, they're based on reason, and they're non-emotive. But that's not to say that there aren't problems with each of these systems of philosophy. But they are valid because they meet those minimum criterion, but there are problems with each of them. And I think what you see is the problem in Republic is that Socrates has to admit at the end of Republic that his ideal republic is never going to come into existence. And we've sort of seen that from the historical record. Has communism succeeded anywhere? Even states that still say that they're communistic, are they really communistic? Not really. So there are problems with each of these. Teleological theory or utilitarianism, now it's called teleological because this is the Greek word telos, is the Greek word for the end of something. So we're going to focus on the ends. And I told you at the beginning of class that one of the things that I judge on is what's called a rational basis test on whether or not I should excuse an absence. So if you email me and you say I was absent, I'm going to look at a means end test, and there should be something called, I put this up here before, a nexus, this model, to determine whether or not I should excuse your absence. What are things that are legitimate means? Well, the end result is you're absent. Why were you absent? Well, I was sick. That's a perfectly legitimate, rational basis for being absent. Perfectly legitimate, right? Don't come to class sick. One of the things we know is that if you're one of those people that I'm tough, I'm going to stick it out. You know, I'm got the fever and the flu and night sweats, but I'm going to, by God, make it to class anyway. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to spread the germs around among all of us, and I'd really rather you not do that, right? So don't come. I'll excuse the absence. Means end. Now, what are we going to look at in terms of ethics? Not whether or not you skipped class, but whether or not the end justifies the means. Who is the first person to come up with this formulation? Most people will tell you that it's one guy. So I'm going to ask you a question. We said that history is important at the beginning of class. You all made arguments that history is important to an understanding of marketing. So I'm going to ask you, when does the modern era begin? When does modernity begin? Any guesses?
Yes.
1960s? Why do you say that? Just taking a guess. Just throwing that out there. It's a good guess. What happened in the 1960s that makes it modern? What? That's, I mean, you can start pinpointing and saying the 1960s is the flourishing of the computer age, right? We had, what really led to the flourishing or the dawn of the computer age? What was the one thing that really led to computers? What? Yeah, space travel. That's the correct answer right there. Ding, 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 we have a winner. Space travel was what led to the need to shrink the computing power that was available at that time down into something. There were computers before then, but they were what? They were massive. How many of you saw a movie on the Enigma code that they used the first really modern computer? So that's a good guess. It's earlier than that. So who else wants to take a guess at when the modern era begins? The 1600s? You're close. Closer than most people get. Most people say the Industrial Revolution at the beginning of the 20th century. You're close. It actually begins in the Quattrocento. That's the 15th century. In a place called Florence and with a thinker called Niccolo Bernardo de Machiavelli. And Machiavelli's most famous work is called The Prince. And why is this the first work of modernity? Well, because in that work, Machiavelli divorces ethics and government from morality. Prior to this time, ethics and morality were tied in with religion intimately through the theology of, particularly in the Western world, the Holy See, or the Roman Catholic Church. And Machiavelli divorces that. It's also considered to be the beginning of modernity for another reason, because we get the emergence of, at the similar period of time in Florence, of the modern banking kinds of systems that we see. And who starts those? Who? Cicero, good guess. The Medici family. And Machiavelli writes The Prince because the Medici come back to power in Florence and he's out of his job, and they throw him out. They throw all of the people that were in the former government out, and he wants to get back in, and he writes The Prince. It was a minor work, but in that you can tease out. Now Machiavelli never says the ends justify the means in The Prince. Again, this is a work of philosophy. This is one that you can read in one sitting, by the way. Unlike Republic, which will take you, it's a fairly thick tome. You can read The Prince. It's a very pithy little work in one sitting. It's also on the list of suggested readings if you're interested in that. The Prince is on there. You can read it in one setting. He never actually says the ends justify the means. Who does pick up on Machiavelli's idea and really fully flesh it out? A couple of thinkers in the Enlightenment named Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill come up with, and John Stuart Mill in a book called Utilitarianism talks about this, the greatest happiness. Now this has been picked up in economic terms by Adam Smith and the free hand of the market. And the idea is in economics that what will happen is if you allow people to determine through the freedom of contract to allocate goods and scarce resources, they will put goods and scarce resources to the highest and best use through this idea of the efficient market hypothesis. So economists talk about not the maximization of happiness, but the reason that business students like this the most is because it's familiar to them in terms of capitalist theory and the maximization of utility, which is getting the most bang for your buck. And economists say that, if you're willing to pay the most money for it, you will appreciate the good the most and you will put it to the highest and best use. And there's a big debate that was going on, and I was listening to this on MSNBC right before Hurricane Irma hit Florida, what was happening in Florida with regard to gas prices. What happens every time there's a natural disaster like that? They increase. And this is called what?
Price gouging.
It's called price gouging. And the governor of Florida was on saying, if you think that there's price gouging going on, please call this hotline and report it, because we will not tolerate price gouging. We won't stand for people. And this economist came on MSNBC and said, price gouging is great. We ought to let people rise, because you've got a problem, and the people who really want the gas the most will pay the most for it. We'll let the free hand of the market decide. You're shaking your head. You don't think that's a good idea?
Wow. Well, some people might want it more, but they can't afford it, obviously.
This economist's point was that there are going to be people without gas in Florida no matter what. So isn't it just better to let the market decide rather than letting government decide? You're going to run out of gas, right? They're going to run out of gas. Why are they going to run out of gas? Or they did run out of gas. There were more people that wanted it that were lining up trying to get out of Florida than there was gas. Now, how are you going to decide? Are you going to let government decide who gets the gas? Or are you going to let the market decide? And somebody's going to be without gas, right? It doesn't matter. And his idea was that you let the market decide, because there's going to be pain either way. It's not a perfect system or elimination of pain. There's going to be pain. Somebody's going to be without gas in this situation. But it's better to let the market take care of it because it might minimize the pain. Because those people who know that they can't afford it are going to do what? They're not even going to go to the pumps and try to get gas. They're going to try and make sure that their house is well secured, that they can get out. What were some of the things that you should have done in Hurricane Harvey that they were talking about? Don't go into your attic unless you have a hole punched through. So people were drilling holes in their roofs in their attic because what happened in Katrina? People stayed in their homes, and as the water kept rising, they kept going up and up and up, and they got trapped in the attic, and a lot of people died in the attic. So what they were doing in Houston, this one guy was going around in his neighborhood and cutting holes in the attic so that people could get out on the roofs if they were going to stay in place. So this economist would say that what people would do is rather than standing in line at a pump because it's futile, if the gas prices rise, they know they're not going to be able to afford it, maybe what they'll do is they'll take other precautions to make sure that they and their family are safe. And you should let the market decide. There are problems with that theory. There are what we call externalities in the market or market failures that don't address these things. But in terms of ethics, what we're going to do is we're going to seek the greatest happiness. Now, how do we do that? How do we maximize happiness? The maximization of happiness or utility. Well, in economic terms, we say, well, we let the market decide. We let people who want the good the most pay the most amount of money for it. How are we going to decide in terms of ethics, not in terms of money? What's the greatest happiness? Well, let's take an example. You and I, how many of you have been to Branson? A lot of you. I'm always amazed at how many students, when I ask this question, have gone, because you're like not 100. Why would anybody who's under about 98 go to Branson? I mean, I've been to Branson, but it's because I have frail elderly relatives that want to go to Branson. I would rather go anywhere else than Branson, but they love Branson because they can see the old time acts. What people who haven't had a hit in the last century are, in Branson. So I'm always amazed. Why do you all go to Branson? What? So you didn't want to go to Branson. You were drugged there by eating. So you went kicking and screaming. Complaining for sure about going to Branson. Anybody love going to Branson? You really like going to Branson?
The food's good.
Oh, the
What?
food is good.
Food's good.
The food's good? Really?
As a kid,
It's mediocre, isn't it?
Maybe it's atmosphere too.
The atmosphere. Where do you like to eat in Branson? I mean, like when you think of great culinary delights, I'm not thinking Branson.
Yeah, the place that does the rolls, Lambert's Cafe.
Oh,
And
okay.
they got some good stir-fry places.
Okay. When I think of great food, I think of New York City, places like New Orleans. Branson is not the top of my list, but okay, I'll go with you on this. That one of the things is what? You don't have to drive as far. That's true. There's a lot more to do in New York City.
yeah.
Guarantee you. So you like Branson because you like the food. One of the things that I do actually enjoy, I've gone to Branson several times, is I enjoy the Titanic Exhibit. They have a permanent display, a museum of the Titanic. How many of you have done this that have been to Branson? Okay, a few of you have done this. What's the ticket to get into the Titanic Museum?
Person.
What?
You get an identity.
You get an identity of a person. I haven't told you all this story, have I? So, I've done this 3 times, and I've been lucky all 3 times because I've been first class passenger all 3 times. And so at the end of your experience in the Titanic exhibit, you get to go and look at the names of people that were on board and see what? Whether you lived or died. It's an uplifting exhibit. It's almost as uplifting as the Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial Museum. It's a great museum, but it's kind of depressing. So you get to go through you get to see artifacts from the Titanic. You get to see the bridge, what it looked like in the night the Titanic sank. You get to go out in front of the bridge and actually put your hand in some water that was the temperature of the water the night the Titanic sank. So, you know, let's suppose that you and I are on the Titanic, and we know how this is going to end, right? It's going to end poorly. But we're lucky. We're some of those first-class passengers that make it onto a life raft. But then we're not so lucky, because the life raft is taking on water, and we look down, and the life raft says maximum occupancy 4 persons. Or, 1,200 pounds. We're taking on water fast. So there's you, there's me, there's Mother Teresa, there's Donald Trump, and there's a stowaway named Bob, who smells like soured milk. Because in the words of Cartman, poor people live in clusters. Right? You all saw that episode of South Park where Cartman is the police officer. Anybody seen that episode?
Yes.
Yeah. You will respect my authority. What are we going to do? Rock, paper, scissors. You're going to dump Bob. You're willing to dump Bob.
Why?
Why?
I'm willing to do it. I'd probably jump out myself, let anyone else live. But I think for the rest of, I guess the majority of people, yeah, Bob's probably gonna get knocked off the boat.
Bob's probably gonna go.
I'm probably Bob. I'm Bob.
Well, let's see. You know, Mother Teresa says, "Well, I'll take one for the team." Well, you know, this is not going to work. The woman is a saint. You're going to need her someday. Well, what about me? We've all heard the jokes, right, about lawyers. Yeah, what do you call 1,000 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean? What is it? What's the punchline? A good start. What's the difference between a dead lawyer on the side of the road and a dead skunk on the side of the road? There's skid marks in front of the skunk, right? Well, but, you know, apart from the fact that I'm a lawyer, now maybe, 23, I think I told you all this, 23 of my students have gone on to pass the Oklahoma. 23 of my students that I've kept in contact with, that I wrote letters of recommendation for, in my 25 years of teaching at the college level, 23 of my students have gone on to pass the Oklahoma bar. One of my students has gone on to pass the New Mexico bar, so I've got 24, and I have one student that actually went on to medical school. So I'm 25 for 25. In terms of getting students to go on to graduate programs. But you might say, well, you've contributed to the problem. You've created 24 mini-yous and one decent human being who became a doctor out of this. So yeah, get rid of a Gary. What about you? Why should we keep you?
I'm Bob, so I already established it.
You've already while you're going. Well, you've got your whole life ahead of you. You've got a bright future. You're here at the Harvard of the Hills, the Berkeley of the Blackjacks, the Princeton of the Plains, getting your degree. You're going to make a difference in the world. Surely we should keep you. Do you see what we're doing here? We're doing the calculus on a human life. it's creepy. It's just creepy. How do you do the calculus on a human life? It's enormously difficult. How are you going to determine that the people that you let live are going to create the greatest happiness? How are you going to perform that calculus? How are you going to perform that analysis? And that the one that you let die would have produced less happiness. It's an impossible task to figure this out, isn't it? But how do you do it? Utilitarians would say you have to. Now there's another problem with utilitarianism. So one problem is that A, how do we do this math of the greatest happiness? It's relatively easy in what economists call very simplified games of game theory, like the prisoner's dilemma. So let's suppose this is a game from game theory. How many of you have seen a movie called A Beautiful Mind? A few of you? What's it about? It's about what?
Well, I don't remember his name, the mathematician. He kind of is crazy.
He's crazy. His name is Nash.
There we go.
And he comes up with something called the Nash equilibrium in game theory. Let's suppose that we have two prisoners together that have committed a crime together, P1 and P2. And let's suppose that they have committed the crime of burglary. Burglary at the common law was defined as one, the breaking, two, entering, three, dwelling, house, four, of another, five, in the night, six, intent to commit felony therein. So, burglary at the common law was defined as the breaking, the entering, the dwelling house of another in the night with the intent to commit a felony therein. At the time the common law was developed, why did they say it in the night? This is what we call in law an elements test. Why did we say in the nighttime when the common law developed? When did cat burglars historically? During the night. Why? Because what? There's no electricity back then, maybe. Also what? People were asleep, so they wouldn't know. In the modern era, the modern statutes do away with this requirement in the night, because when do most people commit burglary now? During the day. Why? Because everybody's gone. It started to switch. Again, somebody said the 1960s was when they were, the 60s when they talked about the modern era beginning. That may be a good argument for a number of reasons. Another reason that it might be a good argument is that what happens in the 1960s with regard to what happens with regard to the way we work? Women started going to work. Overwhelmingly now we have 2 people in the house going to work, so houses are generally abandoned during the daytime, so we've done away with in the nighttime. But at the time the common law was developed, it was in the night because that's when people were asleep. During the day, you would have, the lady of the house would be there. The man of the house would probably be out farming, but people would be awake and they could run and get help. So let's suppose we have two prisoners that have committed the crime of burglary. Why do most people commit the crime of burglary? What's the intent? So burglary is the breaking, the entering, the dwelling house of another with the intent to commit a felony therein. Generally, that's a predicate offense to another felony, which is called larceny, which is the taking and carrying away the property of another with the intent to permanently deprive. That's what most people commit burglary for. So those are generally two offenses, but not necessarily so. You could break and enter the house of another with the intent to commit murder, and that would be burglary. You didn't commit the murder, right? But most people that commit burglary, what do they want? Well, they want stuff so that they can sell it, so that they get money to support whatever it is that they need. Their drug habit, for example. So you have two prisoners that have broken into somebody's house. The reason that the police have caught them is because they were in possession of stolen property. So that's a lesser offense. Now, unless the police get one of the prisoners to confess, they can't get a conviction for burglary. They can only get a conviction for the possession of stolen property, which is a much lesser included offense, right? Within this. So if they don't talk, so the alternatives here are talk and don't, and talk and don't. And if they both don't talk, all they can get them for is possession of stolen property, and that's a 3-year term. If they both talk, they'll get the maximum penalty, which is 10 years for burglary. If one talks and the other doesn't, the one that talks will get a slight reduction for helping out the police. We'll say that they get 7 years and the other one will get the 10. So that's 10 and 7, and the payoffs are 1 and 2. Right? This is what we call a game of complete but imperfect information. It's complete because you know what the options are. You know what the moves of the game are. You have two choices. What is it? Talk or don't. It's imperfect because what? You don't know what the other person is going to do. Right? You don't know what the other person is going to do. Where do you both end up? What? You both end up in prison, but where do you end up? You both end up worse off. You both end up here. Why? Because the incentive to talk is pretty great. Because what are the police going to do? When they catch you, are they going to interrogate you together? No. They're going to put you in different interrogation rooms, and they're going to say something like this. Your buddy's about to break. The first one of you who talks gets the deal. It'll go much better for you if you just tell me now. And so you both end up talking, and you both end up going to jail, and it's worse off for you. But in ethical terms, the lie that the police officers told is ethical because of what? So in utilitarian terms, nothing is ever a priori right or wrong. It's predicated on the outcomes that happen. And so the lie that the police officers tell in this instance is good because two people that are dangerous are going to go away for a lot longer than they would have if they hadn't both talked. Now I use this to illustrate a couple of points here with regard to this analysis. First of all, this is a very simple analysis, and I think we can all agree that if we put bad people in jail, that that's better off for all of us. And so the police officers engaging in a lie is probably okay. On the other hand, it's probably not okay to lie to the police because what will happen? Bad things may flow from that. They may waste resources, chasing down leads that aren't there, things like that, right? So you shouldn't lie to the police, but the police can lie to you. Now, when I used to teach criminal law and procedure, this was Professor Aguirre's #1 rule of dealing with the police. When the man with the badge is talking to you, don't talk. Shut up. They should give you something called your Miranda rights, and you need to exercise those rights. You need to shut up. Right? But you're not going to. You'll talk. because the incentive to talk is overwhelming. So the police officer lies. You shouldn't lie, on the other hand, to the police because it will result in a waste of resources. Now, again, I use this for a couple of reasons. First of all, it illustrates that if we have a very simplistic situation, like a prisoner's dilemma, we can easily ascertain what the greatest happiness is going to be. With regard to the Titanic, we don't know. I think we can all agree that dangerous people breaking into houses need to go to prison, right? They need to go to jail. Some folks need to go to jail. They need to go to jail. That's easy, that's straightforward. With regard to the Titanic thing, that's hard. How are we going to ascertain that? Doing the calculus, it's easy to do the calculus in this situation. Very difficult to do the calculus with regard to the Titanic. A second problem arises that's related to this idea of there are some things that we would just say you shouldn't do. How many of you have seen, they remade this movie. The first make of it, I believe, starred Sylvester Stallone. It was a movie called Judge Dredd. Anybody seen that movie? Nobody seen? They remade it recently, didn't they? Who stars in the new version of it? I think the new version was a horrible flop. But the original was kind of a fairly profitable hit. So in this, what's called a dystopian world, the police are judge, jury, and executioner, all in one. Judge Dredd, so you stop a crime in progress, and the police officer just, takes the life right then and there. Justice is swift. Let's suppose a police officer in our modern world, not a dystopian world, knows that there's a serial killer out there, but he doesn't have enough evidence to arrest him and get a conviction. And he knows that even if he does come up with enough evidence, that it's largely circumstantial, he'll probably get off. And even if he doesn't get off, the state will spend thousands of dollars defending him because he'll become indigent at the point at which he's arrested and doesn't have a job. And then there will be multiple appeals. So the police officer just takes the life in his own hand. He just takes the law into his own hands and takes the life. A utilitarian would say what? That's good. Overall, what's happened here? Again, very simple. We can figure this one out. Can't we? We can do the calculus on this one pretty easily. You kill the serial killer, you've conserved resources, bullets are cheap, courtrooms are expensive, and you've done what? You've saved lives. Well, isn't that good? Most of us would say, don't do that. Now, of course, you're looking at me and saying, well, of course you're going to say that because you're a lawyer. You're part of the problem. You want to make money off of this situation. But even people who are not lawyers generally start to say things like, yeah, I don't think that we should let the police do that. No. There are some things that are just wrong. No matter how much good, we just don't do that. So a second form of utilitarianism pops up, and it's what we call rule utilitarianism. So the purest form of utilitarianism is called act utilitarianism. A second form is called rule utility. And what rule utility does is it attempts to fix the problems with act utilitarianism. It attempts to fix the problem with doing the calculus, and it attempts to fix the problem with doing things that we just sort of say, yeah, don't do that. So what rule utilitarians say is what we need to do is we need to come up with rules that in the aggregate produce the overall greatest happiness. Maybe in a single instance they don't produce overall greatest happiness, but in the aggregate they produce more happiness overall. So what would a rule utilitarian say? Well, a rule utilitarian would say, well, the police officer shouldn't take the life because we have a rule that's against it. And in the aggregate, that produces the greatest amount of happiness because what? We trust the police. We believe that they abide by the rules of the law. that they don't take the law into their own hands and kill people indiscriminately. And on the whole, by and large, that produces the greatest amount of happiness for most of us, because we don't fear the police in this country. When I was getting my doctor's degree at New Mexico State, my second doctor's degree at New Mexico State, there was a crisis happening right across. So New Mexico State sits right on the border of Mexico in Las Cruces. It's 30 miles from El Paso. El Paso sits on the border of what? Mexico with, what's the city, the sister city of El Paso right across the border? Anybody know? Juarez. Right? The first year I was in my doctoral program, there were 2,800 murders in Juarez. 2,800 murders in Juarez, right across the border from El Paso. The government of Mexico that year issued a warning because some of the murders were committed by the police in places like Juarez and Tijuana. And the government of Mexico issued a warning to their people that said you should be afraid of the police. If we had police officers going out and killing people indiscriminately, we would be afraid of them. And this would lead to overall bad results. We see rule utilitarianism applied in things like after the home mortgage crisis in marketing, when banks started marketing what were called alternative loans to people so that they could buy houses that they couldn't really afford, using things like adjustable rate mortgages, we came up with all kinds of rules that said you can't do that. Before that crisis, banks had to go through a process of full documentation before they could market and sell you a loan on your home. And a fully documented loan meant what? That they had to go and they had to verify your employment. And they had to verify not only your employment, but the likelihood of your continuation in employment. And they had to verify your income. And they had to look at your tax returns to make sure that you could do what? Afford the home. When they started deregulating the mortgage lending industry, what did they do? Well, they allowed you to rely on what was called stated income. So you could just tell them what your income was. You could make up your income, and they would believe it. Right? And it led to bad results. So we came up with a rule that said that you shouldn't do that. We came up with rules to try and fix the system. Now, a lot of people have said the rules are oppressive, and we need to reform the rules. That's a debate. Right? So the teleological or utilitarianism. Again, one of the problems becomes with the rule part is it possible to come up with a rule? I don't know. A lot of people would say that those rules that we had after the mortgage industry crisis have led to overall less happiness because less people have the ability to buy homes. Deontological ethics. And we'll probably run out of time because we're at 1:40. There are, again, two types of deontological. Duty ethics says it's the antithesis of utilitarianism. So if we think of this in terms of a Hegelian dialectic, you have utility on one end. This is the thesis. In response to a thesis, if it stays around long enough, you get an antithesis, which one of my high school teachers pronounced antithesis. That's wrong. So I put that in my Oklahoma to English dictionary. You know, it's not antithesis, it's antithesis. An antithesis of utility is duty. And duty ethicists would say results don't matter. It doesn't matter what the result is, because you don't know what the results are going to be. Again, how many of you have done something that you thought was really going to turn out well? How many of you have done this in your life? You thought this was going to turn out well, and it just didn't turn out so good for you. Should we say you were a bad person because you tried something and it didn't turn out? Should we hold you morally culpable? How many of you and your little kids thought, I'll make my parents breakfast, I'll be good, on a Saturday afternoon as they're sleeping in, and I'll make them a meal. How many of you tried this? I tried this as a child. You tried it? Did it end poorly for you?
Yeah, listen, they tell me what they did, what they didn't like.
Oh, okay.
And then-
Well, I tried it at like 4.5 and nearly set the house on fire. You know, the smoke alarms are going off, I've got grease going everywhere. Turned out poorly. But duty ethicists would say, well, you had a good heart. The intention was good. We can't look at the results. There are two forms, religious absolutism and rational absolutism. Now, with regard to religious absolutism, and then I'll stop, how are we going to determine what the duties are from a religious perspective? Where are we going to turn? We're going to turn to the Bible in this country. You're going to turn to the book. That's a good place to stop. I'll pick up there, and we'll then move into market research on Thursday. I passed the roll sheet. If you didn't sign it, if you didn't get to it, be sure and sign it.
Mr. Roldo.
Yeah, it's all that one.